excellent.
Is it on?
Yeah. Let's start it, yeah.
So, Jessica, very warm welcome from Women to Women. Good evening, everyone. Lovely seeing you all. We've had nice cooling weather, so we're not stressed out. Namaste, Jai Chirendra, Jai Swaminarayan, Sai Ram to everybody. We're going to start with Omkar, and then I'll hand over to Caroline. I don't think Daksha has come in as yet,
She's
but
here, I can see her.
keep
She's
an
here
eye
now.
out for her. Om. 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 Om Bhurbhuva Swaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimai Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. Om Bhurbhuva Swaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimai Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. Om Bhurbhuva Swaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimai Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. Once again, Women to Women, welcome you all. Let's have this drill. We'd like to see your names, your proper names on the screens, so we know when we call out or when we do Q&As, we know who we're talking to. Also, it would be nice if all the videos were switched on, because we're not very many people, and it would be lovely to see the faces when we are chatting to each other. Can I invite Caroline to take over, please?
You can. Well, thank you again, Panna, as always, for hosting this.
I can't hear you.
Oh, my microphone's on. Can you hear me, Daksha?
I can hear you, yeah.
Yeah? Microphones. Can you hear me now, Panna?
No?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay, all right. Yeah, well, as always, thank you very much for hosting this and doing all the hard work of communicating with everybody before and after the meetings. And as we discussed towards the end of last session, I think there's still some confusion over worrying about fats, particularly saturated fat and cholesterol. So tonight I'm focusing on that. So I'll just attempt to share my screen. Why can I not see the controls? Woo! There we go. It's all gone a bit weird. Show. I can start. Right, can you all see my screen now?
No, I can see you.
Oh, right. Sharing screen again. Oh, how does it do this? Bear with me. There we go. Hopefully this will work.
Yep.
Lovely. Okay, so hopefully you can all see that now. So as always, I'll just do the little disclaimer to say that I'm here to talk, to share information. I'm not here to give you specific individual medical advice. And if you are going to make any significant changes to your diet, particularly if you're on any kind of medications for diagnosed conditions, then please always seek advice from your GP or practice nurse before making major changes. So with that, without any further ado, on to cholesterol, which is our chosen topic for today. It never, I think, well, I mean, apart from the whole dietary advice and the way modern guidelines have gone throughout the industrialized world, I think cholesterol is probably one of the areas that has got the most myth attached to it and most misinformation. And despite the fact that a lot of it has now been disproven, it's still very much out there and people still worry about it. And indeed, many doctors are still kind of encouraged to look at cholesterol and to put people on drugs if their cholesterol is moderately high. I mean, the high level, or what is considered to be the upper level of normal now, has dropped by a whole 2 millimoles since of units, if you like, since I first was involved in the NHS guidelines. And that is really, unfortunately, driven by vested interests for the profits of the pharmaceutical industry, not for our own good health. And I think this statement on here by Dr. John Abramson, who's from the Harvard School of Public Health, an expert, feels that cholesterol is such an enormously complex molecule, and to think that you can radically pull it out of the body and not have consequences is ridiculous. It's just bad science. And unfortunately, a lot of bad science has been propagated over the last few decades in all areas of dietary advice, but particularly to do with fat and especially cholesterol. So I'm hoping to help you understand it a bit more tonight. This paper was published 4 years ago, and it's one of many now that are showing that the basis of a lot of our dietary advice is really wrong and has been proven to be wrong. And yet, unfortunately, we're still fighting battles to get good dietary advice publicly available. And this particular one showed that the cholesterol and the calorie hypotheses, both of which I've spoken about before, are dead. You know, these are not the way we should be guiding people as to what's a healthy diet. And it's really time to get back and focus on what the real culprit is for most modern chronic diseases, and that is insulin resistance. And of course, I have covered what leads to insulin resistance in previous weeks, and I can come back to it in the Q&As if people missed any of those sessions. So it's really important that we kind of understand where the facts are and where the myths are. So I'm just going to put a question to you. If you arrived at the scene of a fire and there are firefighters present, do you automatically assume that the firefighters caused the fire? And this is a kind of little twist on the association does not prove causation. Because this is exactly what has happened with cholesterol. When people have examined the fatty plaques that have clogged up people's arteries, they've found cholesterol present. And there's been an assumption made that the cholesterol has caused the blockage. But in fact, that's not true. The cholesterol is like the firefighter. It's there because there's been inflammation. And the cholesterol forms part of the inflammatory response of the body, but it's not the causative factor of that blocked artery. And this is really where the whole misunderstanding has come from. It's far, far too simple to think that if you eat foods that contain cholesterol, they just somehow go through the gut, into your bloodstream, and just like pouring fat down your sink, they clog the arteries. The body is a much more complex organism than that, and that's not the way it happens at all. It's really, cholesterol is the innocent party in most of this. This diagram, I don't want it to confuse you, but up here we've got the things that will help to keep your arteries healthy, which is what they call the Mediterranean diet, which is it's quite hard to define an actual Mediterranean diet, but normally when we talk about Mediterranean diet, we talk about a diet that's high in vegetables, particularly vegetables that grow above the ground, lots of extra virgin olive oil, nuts, oily fish, moderate dairy intake, and proper high-fat dairy as well, usually very low in refined foods and sugar. So that will keep your arteries healthy. What's going on below this picture of the fire in the artery is what's going on with our modern diets. We've got insulin resistance developing because we're eating far, far too much refined carbohydrates and foods, particularly that contain fructose. And we're causing inflammation in many, many parts of the body, including our arteries. And when you get this inflammation in the wall of an artery, cholesterol is present in just about every cell in the body, which I'll come back to. And the cholesterol gets oxidized in an inflammatory response, particularly in the presence of substances that are contained in refined diets. And cholesterol is actually an important part of all of our systems, including our immune system and our ability to fight inflammation, but it's being compromised by the substances that are part of a modern diet. So it's present in the plaque that's blocking the artery, but not because it's the problem. It's there because it's been part of what the body's been trying to do to solve the problem. So it's association is very definitely not causation, but this has been misunderstood by so many people and led to the common belief that cholesterol is harmful. So it's insulin resistance that's causing inflammation around the whole body, but particularly in the arteries when we're looking at cardiovascular disease. And during the inflammatory process, as I've just said, cholesterol can be oxidized and form part of the debris that's associated with the inflammation. The presence of polyunsaturated fats, such as those found in seed oils, which are in many refined vegetable oils and in the factory processed foods, is much more likely to cause this oxidation. So the cholesterol does turn nasty, but only because it's been in the presence of foods of substances that really shouldn't be in our body in the first place. So cholesterol is not the enemy. And in fact, cholesterol is absolutely vital to our bodies. It's necessary for hormone production, and hormones are involved in just about every process that we need to go through a daily life for our bodies to tick over and function normally. It also makes bile acids, which are really important to help us with digestion. And it's part of the membrane of every single cell in our body, including the lining cells of our arteries, which is why it's there in the first place when this inflammation starts and has now been blamed for being the cause, but in fact is there innocently. Our brain needs, that's supposed to say 25% of all the cholesterol in our body to function normally. It's critical for our bones and needed to make vitamin D in our skin. So cholesterol is absolutely essential for the vast majority of important daily functions of the body. It is absolutely not an enemy. Now, lipids, when you have your cholesterol level done, sometimes the doctors might refer to it as a lipid profile. And lipid actually means fat, but technically cholesterol is not a fat, it's a lipoprotein. So it's a sort of fatty protein. And cholesterol isn't just cholesterol. There are a number of different elements that make up total cholesterol. You'll have heard, I'm sure, of LDL, which is the low density lipoproteins. Now, we understand better these days that low density lipoproteins are made in two distinct groups: large, very buoyant LDL particles and small, much denser particles. Now, the small, denser particles are the ones that might get into that artery and oxidize in the presence of contaminants that shouldn't be there. And you are much more likely to have more small LDL particles if you've got insulin resistance. So it all keeps coming back to that insulin resistance. The HDL, the high density lipoproteins, are the ones that are known as the good cholesterols, and we should have those in a higher proportion. And the triglycerides are the other fatty substances that our liver stores, and actually can be an end product of too much consumption of glucose and so forth. Now, originally triglycerides are formed by the body as a store for energy, so that when food runs out, we've got those energy stores. But of course, what happens in modern life is we keep feeding ourselves far, far too much, and therefore we get higher levels of triglycerides. And that's particularly, again, a concern when we've got insulin resistance. So in an ideal world, we should have a much higher proportion of HDL to triglycerides. We have a ratio that we look at when, if we properly look at a cholesterol profile, a lipid profile, we shouldn't just be looking at total cholesterol. We should be particularly looking at the HDL to triglyceride ratio. And we want to see the HDL doing better than the triglycerides. What tends to happen in insulin resistance is it's the other way around. So we keep coming back to that insulin resistance that's driving the bad levels. So insulin resistance encourages a reversal of the normal HDL-TG ratio, which is the higher HDL to triglycerides. So when we get insulin resistance, we get that reversal. It's also associated, as I say, with the predominance of the small LDL particles, which are the ones that can get through the membranes of cells and get into the arteries and cause the problems, much more likely to oxidize in the presence of substances that are inflammatory. So, as I say, it's just very simple, really. It just keeps coming back to insulin resistance. And what drives insulin resistance? Sugar. As we've mentioned many, many times, it's the sugar what done it, my lad. So we have spent 50 years or more blaming fat for what the sugar has done. And this all comes back to the fact that back in the day, when people were starting to look at cardiovascular disease and the incidence that they felt it was growing, probably in the 1950s, it was largely due to tobacco, because back in the 1950s, people didn't truly understand the adverse effects of smoking, and smoking was hugely popular and probably was driving a lot of the cardiovascular disease. But the scientists started to look at dietary causes. And we had two very big vested interests at the time. We had the food industry, and particularly the sugar lobby. Well, we didn't have a vested interest on the other side, to be honest. We had the sugar lobby who was driving the fact that sugar, just like the tobacco industry did, that sugar was not harmful. Sugar was not the culprit. Sugar wasn't doing us any harm. It was saturated fat that was the baddie. And that was their ally in that particular argument was the manufacturers of the vegetable oils, the seed oils. Now, they had started back at the beginning of the 20th century being developed to look at them as being an alternative fuel for things like submarines and all sorts of engineering projects. And they found that actually there weren't much use in that particular arena. So they started to look at being able to substitute these artificial fats, if you like, for naturally occurring fats in the diet. So they were sort of sitting in the background. And when we got this lobby that was trying to suggest that it was the saturated fat in our diet that was causing heart disease, not the sugar, those particular manufacturers joined the sugar industry to say, oh yeah, absolutely, and we can replace that. We've got these wonderful products that we can replace butter and all those wonderful natural fats with. And so we got the dietary guidelines that started to incorporate these vegetable oils and condemn saturated fat as the baddies. So unfortunately, we now know, but it's very hard in the face of an industry that has got manufacturers like Coca-Cola and Nestle and many other big food manufacturers who do not want to let this go. And it's going to be a battle very much like we had with the tobacco industry to try and get them to accept that it's their products that are doing all the harm. And actually the naturally occurring fats that the human race developed on over thousands and thousands of years before are not the culprits. And it really does beg a belief that we believe that foods that the human race have been eating for centuries were suddenly causing all these newly diagnosed conditions. But that's where we got to, and that's the power of money, unfortunately. We then also got the pharmaceutical industry coming into the scene, and statins, I've forgotten, Daxter might be able to remember and tell you later, but statins were being sort of looked at for all sorts of things. And when cholesterol started to take the blame for a lot of the problems with cardiovascular disease, we had companies that had these drugs kind of on the back burner, and they saw a marketplace for them. and it's just $1 billion industry now. And the, as I say, the level at which doctors are being encouraged to start thinking about prescribing statins now has just come down and down and down over the last 2 or 3 decades, so that virtually the world and his wife are being encouraged to take statins. And again, you need to sit back and say, how on earth did the human race manage to evolve up until the 1970s without the need to avoid saturated fat and the need to take statins? It's just nonsense, but hey, the marketing people did a great job. And unfortunately, they got into all the bodies that advise us on food. So having tried to convince you that cholesterol is actually not the enemy, and indeed saturated fat is not the enemy, just a quick revision of what is fat. So we've got 3 kinds of fat. Monounsaturated, which is where you've just got the one molecule of fat, and then polyunsaturated. Now, any of the unsaturated fats will be liquid at room temperature, and the ones that we like you to eat will be some of the oils you think about, such as olive oil, avocado oil, etc. The saturated fats tend to be solid at room temperature, apart from the sort of weather we had in the last few weeks, when even those have been melting at room temperature. But coconut oil, which is actually a plant-based oil, it actually contains a significant amount of saturated fat, which is why it's normally solid at room temperature. But actually, there is no naturally occurring fat that is just one of those 3. All of them contain a mixture. They just vary as to the proportion of the different monos, polyunsaturated or saturated fats that they contain. And coconut oil is one of the unique sort of vegetable oils in that it contains quite a high proportion of saturated fat, which is where this conversation really started last time, because Panna mentioned that she'd been put off taking coconut oil because it contained a lot of saturated fat, aka cholesterol. But cholesterol isn't really it shouldn't even be considered when we're considering these fats. What we should be considering is, are they naturally occurring? Have they been derived through simple processes, such as just the compressing of the fruits that they come from, as opposed to industrialized processes that involve lots of chemicals and processes in order to achieve the end result. If they're in that bracket, then they'll be highly inflammatory, and they'll do far more harm than any cholesterol ever could. If they are naturally occurring, then the fats that they contain are all healthy for the body, and we shouldn't have to worry at all about consuming them. I've given you the answer to that, which is the coconut, the food that contains the highest amount of saturated fat. I always do this sort of thing. So the role of healthy fat in our diet: it helps you to burn more calories. You actually need fat to burn fat. It helps the body processes. Low fat is the last thing we should be doing, because we're not meant to function with very little fat. Our whole mechanism of metabolism, we should be burning fat with a little bit of carbohydrate reserve for when times get tough. So it's really important that we consume enough healthy fat. So it helps all your body mechanisms to run properly. It helps you absorb the vitamins that are fat soluble. And if you're on a very low fat diet, you're on a very high risk of being very short of very important fat soluble vitamins. And it reduces the levels of unhealthy fats in the blood. And in fact, when reading some of the stuff that I was reading today to get these slides finished off, I was reminded about a little self-experiment that Asim Malhotra did on himself when he looked at his lipid profile, and it wasn't bad, but he decided to see what happened if he took a spoonful of coconut oil every day, because coconut oil has got lots of different health benefits. And he decided to just, it's an N=1 experiment, but I think it's been repeated in various other scenarios. But he took coconut oil every day for a number of weeks and then repeated his lipid profile, and his HDL to triglyceride ratio had improved dramatically, even though it wasn't bad to start with. So having all that saturated coconut oil wasn't making any adverse difference. It was in fact improving his ratio. So again, it's a lot of nonsense that healthy saturated fat does you harm. It simply doesn't. And obviously adding fat to food improves the flavour and improves the satiety. I can never say this word. So the satisfaction, or even attempt it today. You feel much more satisfied after a meal that's contained a reasonable amount of fat. And of course, what happened when we were all told to eat low fat, if you were keeping fat to a very small proportion of your daily energy intake, we were advised also to keep protein at modest levels. That meant we had to replace those foods with nearly 50% carbohydrate. And as I've tried to tell you in previous weeks, taking a lot of carbohydrate on board is not good for us, and it just drives the insulin levels, drives the excess calories into our liver as triglycerides, and causes a lot of inflammation and ultimately insulin resistance. So trying to remove fat from the diet just does nothing but harm, and we absolutely need it for health. And the real baddies in this particular war are all these awful fats that they introduced back in the 50s, 60s and 70s when they were trying to persuade us that saturated fat, as if any one fat was just saturated. That was, you know, a real sort of little diversion to throw us off track. But these industrialized seed oils that they convinced us were much better for us, that were not only sold in the bottles like you see on the shelf, but also put into margarines. And in fact, the process of getting them to look like a solid margarine involved hydrogenation, which was even worse. It kind of just made worse the industrial processes that the oils had already gone through. And these are just absolute dynamite in terms of causing inflammation and driving huge numbers of the problems that we now suffer from. So all of these oils that have to be produced through industrial processes, because the original product that they start as doesn't actually contain much oil, and if it does, it's really hard to get it out, so they have to go through these awful processes to get there. That's what's driving the problem, not your nice healthy fats. So industrial seed oils are pro-inflammatory. They're heated to such high temperatures that they cause toxic byproducts. They're extracted using petroleum-based solvents. There's all sorts of sludge that's bleached and refined and deodorized, colored to look appealing, and then when heated at home in cooking, cause even more toxins to be produced. So just bad news altogether. So vegetable oil releases toxic chemicals called aldehydes, which cause cancer and neurodegenerative diseases, as well as all this other inflammation that we've been talking about. So it's the highly processed carbs that are driving the current chronic diseases, not healthy fats. And the highly processed carbs combined with those awful seed oils is just an even bigger recipe for disaster. Now the pictures, I apologise for the offensive pictures here of a duck being force-fed to make foie gras, but you know, in the bad animal industries, I appreciate many of you may well be vegetarian, and this won't help the cause of the meat eaters, but this is why we impress on people who do eat meat that they should go for slowly reared, grass-fed meat or naturally fed animals as much as possible, because in order to produce these fat animals, they feed them grains, the very thing that we're being told should form 50% of our diet. But that's what we give animals to fatten them up. So is it any wonder that we've gone from the nice lean early man to the great big obese people that we see around the country now? No, because we've been eating completely the wrong food for our particular species. So just to end, I find this fascinating. Ancel Keys is the guy that did an awful lot of work on the heart health hypothesis and the fat being the baddie. And yet, in 1956, he wrote that in the adult man, the serum cholesterol level is essentially independent of the cholesterol intake over the whole range of human diets. He's basically saying in 1956, cholesterol in your diet does not go into your arteries and cause heart disease. And yet the studies that he went on to do, because they were funded by people with vested interests, huge amount of data was left out, and he managed to come up with a hypothesis and prove his hypothesis that dietary fat caused heart disease. But he actually said back in 1956 that it didn't. And even in 1997, he wrote, there's no connection whatsoever between cholesterol in food and cholesterol in blood. And we've known that all along. Cholesterol in the diet doesn't matter at all unless you happen to be a chicken or a rabbit. Don't know about their diets, but presumably it's not good for them. But this is the man who actually did so much harm because he took the money of the people with the vested interests. And yet that's what he actually said. And yet that's been hidden from most people for all these years. And more recently, the fact that cholesterol in the diet has no impact on cholesterol levels or cardiovascular disease was reaffirmed. In 2015, the dietary guidelines in America, having reviewed all the evidence, the body that writes those guidelines said cholesterol is not considered a nutrient of concern for overconsumption. I mean, we still have the problem that trying to convince doctors, particularly the medical world, and many people who just got it in their heads that cholesterol is bad for us, it's proving to be difficult to get over that myth. But we'll get there, I hope. So there are some further resources if anybody's interested. Seymour Hotcher, who's a cardiologist, many of you I'm sure will have heard of him. He's done a lot of work on this, and he came up with a nice book a few years ago called The Piopi Diet, which was based on sort of having gone and studied people that live in southern Italy who live healthily into very old age, and looked at what they ate and what their lifestyle was like. And he based this book with lots of good evidence as to why around the sort of Mediterranean diet that he found those people eating. And he's published quite a lot of papers, so I've given you a link there to one of his papers. Dr. Malcolm Kendrick's a GP up in our part of the world, in Macclesfield in Cheshire, who's got a wonderful mind, and he has really taken apart the whole cholesterol hypothesis and the statin obsession, and wrote a book called The Great Cholesterol Con back in 2008, which is well worth a read, because he really goes into great detail about how it's just nonsense. But if you can't sort of, be bothered to read a whole book, he does blogs as well. And I've given you the link to one of his blogs that talks about how saturated fat cannot raise your cholesterol levels. And also there's a film. The link I've given you there is just to a 17-minute excerpt from it. But it gives you a really good overview again of why it's so wrong that statins are being used to drop people's cholesterol, when cholesterol is not the issue. What we should be looking at with these people who have got signs of metabolic disease is changing their diet to the low carb variety and helping to reverse their metabolic syndrome with sensible, real food, as opposed to being obsessed about their cholesterol levels. So those are just a few. And on the WhatsApp group afterwards, if people want to ask me for more things to read, and Dacia, I'm sure, also will be very happy to share other bits of wisdom where you can find more information if you so wish. But I hope I've helped a little bit to dispel the idea that cholesterol is the baddie. It's the sugar, what did it, governor? So over to you for any questions.
So the first question we've got is, what is a good level of cholesterol for diabetics?
Well, if you care about your level of cholesterol, this is where I find it very hard, because I was a practice nurse 20 odd years ago, and then we were fairly happy with a cholesterol level of 6-ish. It started when they first started measuring cholesterol, they weren't too bothered if it was 7. Now, I believe, because I try and stay away from the doctor as much as I can, so I haven't had mine done for years, I believe they're kind of down to something like 5.2. So, it depends who you're following. I would say if your cholesterol's 6, it's perfectly all right. I am much, 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 much more concerned about your HDL and triglyceride ratio. And we should have HDL over 1 and triglycerides less than. So that's what people should be looking at. They should not be looking at total cholesterols. They should be looking at the HDL triglyceride ratio. And if they want to bring your triglycerides down, if it's up, you will do that much more effectively by dropping the carbs in your diet than you will by taking any drugs or taking any of these drinks and yogurts and things and margarines that have been produced by dubious means and supposedly help to bring your cholesterol down. So it's the HDL triglyceride ratio that you really, really need to be looking at, not total cholesterol.
Yeah, I would completely agree. Next question is, please can you name some good fat for vegetarians in the daily diet?
Okay, well, olive oil is one of the best. We tend to recommend not cooking. I'll saute in olive oil if I'm just doing something sort of lightly, not cooking it for too long and not on a high heat. But olive oil is great for dressings and drizzling over things and all the rest of it. And indeed, some people in Asim's POP diet, he recommends literally taking a tablespoon of olive oil daily to get that into the body. So for cooking, avocado oil will tolerate much higher heats than olive oil. Again, you want to look for cold pressed because the cheaper ones are likely to contain some refined products. And coconut oil. And despite the fact that coconut oil has a lot more saturated fat in it than olive oil or avocado oil, it is perfectly safe for you to consume. And again, many of the lifestyle medicine doctors recommend people even, again, just take a spoonful of coconut oil daily. In fact, it's recommended. You can get very refined coconut oil that's called MCT oil, where they literally take the two particular molecules that are the healthiest. So refine it down so their oils, which are liquid at room temperatures, just contain those particular components. And there's some evidence that taking that daily can help to ward off dementia because our brains desperately need cholesterol and they need these fatty substances to function well. And there's been studies done showing that people with dementia, if they're just on a carbohydrate type diet, you can see that the lack of impulses in the brain. And then if they're given ketones, which is what you get if you're burning fat, and these MCT oils are really good at raising your ketone levels, you can see a huge improvement in the brain scans of these people with dementia. It's early work yet, but a lot of people are calling dementia type 3 diabetes because they feel it's an onward progression of this metabolic syndrome and this poor diet that many of us are eating. So MCT oil, again, it's quite expensive, and I would only add it to drinks and things. I wouldn't cook with it because it's much too expensive. I'll put it in salad dressings, things like that. But yeah, so coconut oil, avocado oil, olive oil would be the ones I'd recommend.
And then there's ghee as well, isn't there?
Oh, well, ghee, sorry, if you're not vegan, then ghee. Ghee is fine because you can cook with high temperature with ghee because the milk solids have been taken out, so it'll tolerate high heat and it's tasty. If you like a buttery taste, I use quite a lot of ghee in frying. Yeah,
me too. I use ghee for certain things. Now this is a similar question, but I feel like it's meant differently because it's like, what's the best cooking oil? So I get the feeling it's more about the frying, the deep frying maybe. So
yeah. Well, I think coconut oil, probably, avocado oil. I mean, deep frying, you do have to be careful because there are concerns about, particularly if you get towards burning food, that can be harmful. And also changing oils so that you're not getting residues that can form components that are not that healthy. But and deep fried food is always going to be more energy dense, even though we're telling you that healthy fats are healthy and you can eat far more than we've been led to believe. At the end of the day, if your meal has got a very high proportion of fat, then there's going to be a lot of energy in that. And if you're not working it, if it's going to lead to an excess of energy intake over output, ultimately it will help your weight loss if you are trying to lose weight. But if you do the occasional frying, then ghee or coconut oil, I suppose. What do you think, Dacha?
Yeah, I suppose there's avocado oil as well, but
Yeah,
I think most people who are doing deep frying are probably deep frying food that's not healthy in the
Yeah.
first place.
well, that's
So
a very good point, is what is it you're deep frying? Because if it's a vegetable, fine, but if it's something that's made of lots of, you know, flours that are things that we're trying to encourage you not to eat, then obviously the deep frying would be the least of your problems.
yeah, so I mean, as an Indian, I know that we deep fry samosas, watadawara, which is like these little balls of mashed potato that have got a gram flour coating. So these are all quite carby things, and then you deep frying them, so combining them with fat. So yeah. So
which is the ultimate baddie.
yeah,
That's why they're so tasty, because you've
A
got
lot of bitters.
you've got the carb and the fat,
yeah.
unfortunately, which is the bliss thing, and not good.
And
So if you can make, you know, and you can make, I mean, you can make quite healthy bhajis by using coconut flour or something like that to bind them, and you're deep frying those, then, you know, the ghee or the olive oil, not olive oil, avocado or coconut oil will fry those. But if you're frying something that's got a lot of flour in it, then obviously it's just not good.
No.
Yeah, shouldn't be eating that anyway.
I was also told a teaspoon of ghee in hot milk is good for you.
Well, I can't see it won't do you any harm. And I mean, some of us do this coffee that's called bulletproof coffee, where we put a spoonful of that MCT oil I was talking about, and a spoonful of butter, and blitz it with a hand blender, and it comes up nice and frothy and milky looking, and it is actually very tasty. It sounds disgusting, but it's actually very tasty. So some people will do that. So, you know, we can use fats in ways that we probably traditionally don't think of. And as long as they're not being combined with carbohydrates, then that's fine. And as long as the fat itself is a healthy fat. So, you know, we like our full fat milk, but you just, again, if you're trying to lose weight, you have always to be mindful of the fact that if you're having these in addition to your main meals, it's going to add to your total energy intake. And whilst we don't like to talk about calories in, calories out, the bottom line is to lose weight, we need to be taking in less energy than we're expending. Now, different foods are used by the body in a different way, but if you're having a very high fat intake, it can stall your weight loss. So we have to work out what's the best balance for ourselves.
Malti has recommended How Not to Die by M. Gregor is a good book. So I don't know if she...
Yeah, I think I've heard of this one. I've got millions of books, but I don't think I've got that one.
I've not heard of that one.
Yeah, I know why I was hesitating there. I've got this one, which is called Eat Well or Die Slowly, which came out last year. It's written by a doctor who wasn't particularly into nutrition and things, but she started to discover that her health wasn't great, and like many doctors, discovered that everything she thought she knew about diet was awful. But yes, I think I've heard about that one, and it's one I need to have a look at. And I'm sure it probably, I'll have to have a look and have a look at its sort of synopsis, and I'll let you know on the WhatsApp group what I think.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling I've heard about that one. It probably is okay, but I need to double check.
Yeah, that would be very helpful. Thank you. And then Jumpa's asking, is non-HDL cholesterol known as triglycerides?
Right, well, as I explained, a cholesterol profile, a lipid profile, should break down into LDL cholesterol. Unfortunately, the standard ones that are done don't tell you whether it's the big LDL particles or the small ones. That can be discovered if people are bothered to do more specialized tests. But your GP, when they do your cholesterol profile, they always get a total. Then they should get a breakdown of your LDL, your HDL, and your triglyceride. And the lab should put a ratio of the HDL to triglycerides. So you have your triglycerides, and then you have your HDL and your LDL. That straightens it out. And the LDL, the big buoyant LDL, is good for you. So it's, again, a complete misnomer that LDL is always described as the bad cholesterol, because it's not as simple as that. And if you're eating a healthy diet, then you should have far more of the good LDL circulating than you will these small particles. So, you know, with a good diet, and some people, when they go onto a low carb diet and increase the amount of healthy fats they eat, their total cholesterol and their LDL does go up, and people panic about that. But if they looked into what kind of LDL it was, they would probably find that actually it's just the good stuff that's increased. But many doctors don't know and understand that. So unfortunately, it puts people into panic mode.
Yeah, that's all the questions we have so far this evening.
Oh gosh, have we bamboozled you all? Feel free to ask anything at all, even if it's not about cholesterol.
Right, so we've got, would you take medicine prescribed by doctor for cholesterol if it's higher than 7?
Again, I would not take a statin, if, you know, ever. I know so much about it. I personally would never take one. And the first question I would want to know is, what is that profile? Because it's not, it's, say, the number 7 is just referring to your total cholesterol. And it could be that your LDL is not bad. And it would be a matter of looking at what your HDL and triglyceride profile was like. And if I found my triglycerides were high, then I would do something about it with my diet. I wouldn't take a drug. I mean, I'm not telling you anything that's not known, but it's not widely put out there that for somebody who's never had any kind of heart event, heart attack, or diagnosed with any particular heart condition, who's been put on a statin purely because they're either been diagnosed diabetic or they've been found to have a high cholesterol, taking a statin does not extend your life by more than a couple of days.
No, statin
it's never explained to people. Are you wanting to disagree, Panna, or are you?
Yeah. Statin is what hit my heart. That gave me 5 stents. The
statin, yeah. Well, actually, a statin in postmenopausal women has a huge increases your chances of developing metabolic syndrome and diabetes by up to 50%. So older women should be advised very carefully, and they shouldn't just be told, oh, your cholesterol's this amount, you should take a statin. They should have the whole story explained to them. And statins are not without their side effects. In fact, they've got a lot more side effects than the manufacturers are prepared to admit. And for people who have not yet had a cardiac event, they do not extend your life, and yet they are sold as lifesavers. And people are frightened not to take them because they think if they don't take them, they will have a heart attack. And what's going to do you much more good is changing your diet. So, but you know, I'm not here to give you advice, but I'm just passing on. So Dash and I have been to many conferences and heard the experts speaking. And people who haven't got a vested interest in the pharmaceutical industry, who will give you the honest picture, will tell you that statins are not the lifesaver that they're made out to be.
Can I add something? There's another public health ambassador like Carolyn and myself, and he's called Keith. Actually, I don't think he's an ambassador. I think he's a trustee or something, but he's involved with the charity. And he had his cholesterol at 14, and his doctor wanted to put him on statins, and he managed to get the doctor to do another sort of like a scan. Is it the calcium artery? The calcium
score, yeah.
Yeah, and that was 0. Yeah. So, you know,
a calcium scan is a much better indicator of how healthy your cardiovascular system is, but it's not offered on the NHS.
Yeah.
It's, you know, it's a very complicated business to go into on something like this, and maybe, you know, we need to think in the future about maybe getting somebody with more medical kudos than we've got to talk you through this. But the statin issue is a huge one, and it's Dr. Hasim Malhotra, who's a cardiologist, has got a new book coming out actually called How to Live a Statin-Free Life, and it's coming out in a couple of weeks' time. And that would be well worth reading, because I think he's somebody who really knows what he's talking about, who absolutely feels that people should not be put on statins purely because of cholesterol results. That he thinks there's one or two situations where a statin might be appropriate, but not for the average person who's simply got a high cholesterol. And
he's got an Asian background, so he's got an idea of how we eat, and so there might be some good tips in there. So it's all rounded. It's not just about the Western diet.
He explains quite a bit in the Piopi diet. This is the Piopi diet book that I was mentioning earlier. There's quite a bit on cholesterol in there, but he's obviously gone a whole heap further with this new one, specifically around statins. I mean, he's put his neck on the line, and he's crossed a lot of people in the established medical world who've given him a very hard time. But he's sticking to his guns because he just feels it's vested interests rather than good medicine that's leading the statin drive at the moment.
Pushpaben has a question for you.
Yeah. Good evening. I had a stroke. I didn't have any cholesterol or anything, but still I have to take the tablets for the cholesterol, and it's something I'm taking. So do you recommend any other tablets?
No, I mean, obviously I wouldn't like to tell you if you've had a cardiovascular incident. I do not want to get involved in telling you to stop taking any drugs, but you are going to do much more good. You can carry on taking them if they're not causing you massive side effects, but you will do yourself much more good with dietary changes. Do you know what your total cholesterol and what your triglyceride levels are?
No, my cholesterol always low. I didn't have any. Still, I don't have any cholesterol. But still, the doctor recommend me take the cholesterol tablets because of the stroke.
I don't know what to say. I really don't. I mean, that's just appalling. Well, unfortunately, what happens, and a lot of people who are watching may be diabetics, and diabetics are now automatically put on statins when they're diagnosed.
Yeah, I am diabetic as well.
Absolutely wrong. Maybe you're on the statin because of your diabetes rather than that, but you shouldn't be on it if your cholesterol isn't high. I mean, it's just nonsense. But dietary changes will make much more impact. But please do not stop taking any medications on my state. So, you need to talk about it with your doctor. But most good doctors who, if they know enough, should be willing to let you try coming off them, particularly if your blood markers aren't high. Because what's the point if you've been on them? I think there is some argument that they've got some anti-inflammatory properties. But again, the inflammation would be better helped with the change in diet. So have you managed to make any alteration to?
I always watch my diet, what I eat, but still
in terms of carbohydrates.
Yes, well, yeah.
Because it's the carbohydrates that are driving the inflammation and driving things like triglycerides. Although it sounds like maybe yours are all right, but I would have a serious talk with your doctor about. Ask them why you're on the statin. If your cholesterol isn't high, just put him on the spot and say, why am I having to take this drug?
Yeah,
if it's purely because you're diabetic, then if your cholesterol's all right and it's remaining okay, then there's no justification for keeping you on it.
Okay, I will talk to him. Even he prescribed me the blood pressure tablets as well. I don't have any blood pressure.
What can I say? I think we have a generation of doctors now who just seem to think they have to provide pills all the time. And I think they've been frightened into not doing something, rather than frightened into doing something rather than not doing something and letting you alone if all your markers are good. I mean, if you haven't got high blood pressure, you shouldn't be on a blood pressure pill. I mean, are you sure your blood pressure is not okay simply because you're on
my okay has always been okay because of the stroke? They said you have to take it.
It's
No,
that
if-
2 + 2 = 5 scenario, unfortunately, with a lot of these people that, you know, and medication isn't without its side effects and its own problems. So, you know, I would have a serious talk and say, you know, it's my body, my life. How important do you think these drugs are? If A, my cholesterol's all right, and B, my blood pressure's all right, should I really be taking these? Because cholesterol, as I say, statins drive diabetes in older women. So it just doesn't seem logical to have you on it if your cholesterol's all right.
Yeah, cholesterol, blood pressure, everything's okay.
Yeah.
Still, I'm taking
So
tablets.
that just makes me put my head in my hands, I'm afraid.
Could I ask a question,
Yeah.
please? I want to know, because this lady is talking about cholesterol, and I was told it goes higher with the as you get older, the cholesterol goes higher, and that is why doctors are putting people on statins. Is it true?
I don't know if there's any evidence for that specifically. Datcha, have you got anything there?
I've heard Dr. Asim Malhotra say that when his patients come to him and they say, "Doctor, my cholesterol is high," and they're over 60, he says, "Congratulations."
Yeah.
So that's in Dr. Asim
Absolutely.
Malhotra's eyes, that is a bonus. It's very good to have higher cholesterol.
Yeah, because I mean, I didn't want my slide presentation to go on for hours and hours, but I've got so many different slides I could have shown you tonight. And one of them is a number of studies that have been done showing that all-cause mortality, that is death from any cause, is lower in people with high cholesterol. I have an uncle, he's not an uncle by marriage, he's an uncle by marriage, as I say, not blood relation, but he will be 100 in 2 weeks' time. His cholesterol has been 8.2 for as long as they've been measuring it. He's never taken a drug. He's still fully mobile. He's very deaf, but other than that, he's completely with it. And he's, you know, he's a real, always eaten. He lives in Ireland and lived a fairly rural life, and he's always eaten good, wholesome, homegrown food, including the Ulster fry, as they call it over there. And his cholesterol is 8.2, but he will be 100 in 2 weeks' time. The all-cause mortality is higher in people with very low cholesterol levels. So having a decent cholesterol level is not something to be frightened of. It's, you know, it's a false marker of health. What's much more important is weight, particularly waist measurement, you know, fat around your middle, blood pressure, and your blood sugar. Diabetes, well, metabolic syndrome, which drives diabetes, drives cardiovascular disease. And that is all coming back to diet.
Yeah.
So even if you have a history of stroke and heart attack in the family, you still think we shouldn't be taking statins? If
your personal cholesterol level is okay, then, or indeed if it's slightly raised, but you know your diet perhaps could be tweaked a bit, then you should try the diet before you go on the medications. Now, there's a condition called familial hypercholesteremia, where people have very high cholesterol levels despite eating a healthy diet. And that's a different ball game, and I don't want to get into that. And even there, they're looking at whether statins are actually appropriate. But for even, you know, I could say I've got a family history because my mother's cholesterol has always been technically raised, and a couple of her siblings have had heart attacks. But I don't worry about myself. And I think what's much more important is my lifestyle. It's having good exercise and eating that healthy diet. That's going to do me much more good than taking any drugs.
Thank you. That answers my question. Thank you.
It also might be useful to say to all of you, 100 years ago, there weren't any cardiologists. And if you looked at cause of death, the vast majority of people died from trauma or infection. Heart disease didn't raise, you know, an interest in the medical profession at all, because people were eating a fairly natural diet 100 years ago. It was sort of as the 20th century progressed and we got more and more of this manufactured food, and of course we got cars and you know, life through the century, had us being much more sedentary, and then fast food and all the rest of it. So it's just kind of like the snowball, just got worse and worse as the 20th century progressed. But 100 years ago, people did not worry about heart disease, and they ate and they drank an awful lot more alcohol in poor communities where water supplies weren't great, because the alcohol was safer than the water supply. So life was very different, but heart disease virtually didn't exist. And I think that's what drew attention to it when we got into the 40s and 50s, because suddenly people were having heart attacks. But back then, I suspect, as I say, smoking was playing a huge part in that. Before the diet really deteriorated. So are we missing any questions here?
Well, there's a particular person who wants to stay anonymous for good reason, and they just said they have high cholesterol in their liver. Well, the GP's told them they've got high cholesterol in their liver. They want to do an ultrasound scan. Should I ask for a breakdown of the cholesterol?
I think you should. I think if he's talking about your liver, it might mean you've got very high triglycerides, and he's worried about you having what we call fatty liver. Fatty liver is when you make so much triglyceride that your liver, can't store it very easily, and it gets overloaded, and that can long-term cause liver damage. So he's right to be concerned about it, but the best way of reversing that is to drop the carbohydrates, because you can, Dr. Unwin, who I'm sure I've mentioned many times, who's the GP up in Southport, who really kind of got the low carb movement rolling in the UK. He's seen huge improvements in his patients with fatty liver when they've changed their diet and gone low carb. But I would let him investigate. But if I think what he'll be talking about, and you should ask him to be a bit more precise than just general cholesterol. But if he's asking for an ultrasound, I think it's because he's suspecting you've got fatty liver, and therefore it'll be the triglycerides that he's worrying about. Is rice and wheat bad for carbohydrates? Well, they're both carbohydrates, so they're both bad. Yeah, if that answers that question. If you haven't been here for previous sessions, you'll understand that unfortunately, it's all of these grains that we eat, and particularly in the Asian diet, you eat quite a lot of. And the problem is, partly the grains you eat today are nowhere near as wholesome as the grains that would have been eaten 50 or 100 years ago. They've been refined a lot more by the growers and the manufacturers to improve yields and to keep them cheaper, and for all sorts of reasons. And therefore they're doing us more harm than they would have done. But also, our traditional diets are now getting mixed with other things, with processed foods and these seed oils. And therefore, if you just ate carbohydrates, but they were really, really well-grown and healthy carbohydrates, you'd probably just about get away with it. But because they're now being mixed with modern foods, they are unfortunately part of the problem. And we really need you to cut down dramatically on those. It's hard, I know, with some of the diets that many of you, or the type of foods that many of you will like to eat, to cut them out completely. But if you can be mindful of what you're eating, get the best quality, and keep the amount as small as you can, and try and substitute. We've talked about cauliflower rice and using vegetables to be a base for a curry, rather than always assuming you have to have rice or a chapati or whatever, and try and keep those to once a week or whatever, but get used to having your main dishes without those carby additions. It's kind of psychological that you think you need them because it's habit and you think it's part of the dish. But actually, if the main dish is tasty and made with good ingredients, it's enough. Especially if you use healthy fats, it'll satisfy you. But it's like us in the Western diet, having potatoes with every meal. It took me a long time to be able to look at a plate of food and think it'll satisfy me if there were no potatoes on the plate. And I'm absolutely fine with that now. It was really in my head. And of course, what carbs do is they peak your blood sugar, so you get a rush of insulin, assuming you're still insulin sensitive. And that clears your blood sugar very rapidly. So you're hungry again very soon. So it makes you eat more. So if you can get rid of the carbs, and have a really good satisfying meal, you should be able to go from one meal to the next without having to snack, because the snacking is what's doing an awful lot of the harm in modern life.
Yeah, I agree. Somebody would like an explanation about a calcium scan.
Yeah, a calcium scan is a scan. I'm not quite sure what kind of scanner they use. Unfortunately, in the UK, you have to get it done privately. I'm not aware of anybody that's able to have been able to get one of these done by the NHS. And it's probably a bit more like, I don't think it's an ultrasound type thing. It's probably a bit more like a CT scan. And basically what they're looking at are all the blood vessels around the heart and looking at calcium deposits. Because calcium deposits are there when there's been a lot of inflammation, and it gives them a much better picture of how likely you are to have a cardiac event. Because if your blood vessels are highly calcified, then it means there's been a lot of inflammation, and it puts you up at a much greater risk factor for a heart attack or other cardiovascular event. And I think a score below 100 is considered to be okay. Obviously, the nearer to 0 it is, the better. But over 100, and again, it can be reversed with change in diet. There was another film, trying to think who did that one. It was Donald O'Neill, wasn't it? And
Ivor Cummings.
Yes,
He did
Ivor.
a lot of work with that, doesn't he?
It was Ivor. And they looked at a football team who'd won a tournament in Ireland 20 or 30 years before, and looked at these guys. Now they're all middle-aged, and they kind of assumed that because they'd had a very active, sporty career, that they'd all be very heart healthy. And it was quite interesting. They all had a calcium scan. They had other things done as well, but there were some real shockers, and they weren't necessarily amongst the ones who put on more weight. But the ones who had the highest calcium score, they followed them up, and with a significant change in their diet and lifestyle, they dramatically dropped that calcium score. So just as we're talking about with triglycerides and so forth, it can be dramatically improved with the right changes to lifestyle. It doesn't require medication.
I've just put a link in on something that Ivor Cummings has done about the calcium.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Somebody's talking, my GP has told me, oh no, we've done that one.
What's a CT angio scan? Do you know? Want somebody's
An
asking?
angiogram is a different thing. That's when they inject a dye, and so they can see the blood vessels around the heart. So this is what's traditionally done if you've got either had a heart attack or you've got angina or something, and they're worried about the state of the blood flow around your heart. That's a slightly different thing, and that will show them if there's narrowing, but it's not picking up calcium particularly. It's just showing where the blood vessels might be looking like they're getting blocked. So that's the more standard one that's done, but that's done symptomatically. So again, you can't just roll up and say to your GP, can I have an angiogram? It would only be done if you've already got symptoms. Calcium scan is very much more a preventive tool, and they cost a few £100s, I believe. And as I say, unfortunately, at the moment, the NHS is not interested. I mean, they save a fortune. They stop spending the money on all these statins and allowed people to have a calcium scan when they hit about 50. I think they'd save a lot of money because they could get people reversing stuff before it gets too bad. But, you know, prevention doesn't seem to be in the NHS's mantra at the moment.
No, it doesn't. This is a really good question. Ranju's bought some shelled hemp, and she'd like to know how to include it with her meal.
So these are hemp seeds, I presume.
I think
you can use hemp seeds in curries and things as yet another ingredient. You can use it. I make seed crackers where I put all sorts of things: pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, chia seeds, you name it. And I've used hemp seeds in those. I've put hemp seeds into soups and then blitz them. So if they cook in the soup, they soften, and then when you blitz it, it's not, you know, you're not getting the hard bits. It's quite a nice flavour. I suppose it's probably like all flavours. Some people will like it and some people won't. But hemp is, you know, it's got a lot of good nutritional benefits. So just experiment. Have you got any experience with it, Dacia?
I sometimes will put it in my granola. I've made hemp seed milk as well at home, you know, as an alternative to dairy, and that's quite nice.
So would you soak the seeds and then blitz them?
Yeah. And then you've obviously, if you've got them, if they're not shelled, if they're shelled, then you can just use it. I think it blitz quite nicely.
Yeah.
If they've got a shell on them, then you've got to use a nut bag to get the bits out. But yeah, and that's quite a nice alternative milk. Also I think you might have said they sprinkle them on salads and things.
Yeah, I mean they're nutty, and you know, just like any seed, you can incorporate them in lots of different things.
And you can Google some recipes, hemp seed recipes, but then just be careful that they're not full of other carbohydrates.
I was also told that avocado seed and the peel, if you dry it and then just sieve it in your milk or your salad or anything, it's just as good as hemp seeds.
Yeah, I've blitzed an avocado seed before now and used it, and it's fine. It's, you know, and again, you've often got a lot of really good nutrients in the seeds.
Absolutely.
Where it all goes wrong with the seed oils is that they use all sorts of horrible chemical processes, but seeds themselves are usually quite healthy, as long as they're not being adulterated with foreign substances.
Let me just see if we're missing anything else. And we said the rice. Oh, what is good triglyceride?
Oh, what's the bottom? Oh gosh, my mind's gone blank. I know we want HDL to be above 1.
I think 4.6.
Sorry?
4.6.
Oh, 4.6 isn't good. That's not good.
No.
Hang on, I'll just Google it very quickly. Can you remember off the top of your head?
No, not off. I have the American units, and that's no good. I've not managed to convert it.
Hang on,
to the UK
keep
units.
talking for a second.
I'm just saying, is bran flakes high in carbs? Yes, they are very high in carbs.
All cereals are horrendous.
Can I just take this opportunity to remind you all to look at your labels, because the whole point of these sessions is to get you to be independent, you know, and sort of like detectives to check what you can and can't eat. We can't be with you all the time, unfortunately. So it's really, really important that, you know, you can pick up a box of something or a packet of something, look at the labels, look at how many carbs there are, not just the sugars, but like total carbs, you know, and then sort of get an idea of how many carbs there are in that particular product. So for example, I know when I started eating low carb, I'd look at like a box of, I literally went around the house and looked at everything. I just picked up this tin and this packet, and now I used to, like bran flakes, I used to eat thinking they were healthy, not because I liked them, because I thought they were good for me. And when I realized that actually I'm eating something that isn't even good for me, I was really, really disappointed and quite upset, to be fair, you know, because I could have eaten something else that was far healthier.
It can
but
be
I didn't recognize it.
Yeah, quite a shock for a lot of common foods to look at the total carbohydrates. And you have to remember that all carbohydrates, ultimately, they're just lots of sugar molecules joined together, and our body, our digestive system just breaks them back down to those sugar molecules. So all carbohydrates are sugar. So I've just seen that the classic, is porridge any good? Porridge is full of carbohydrate. Now, the old pinhead oatmeal that I've just managed to get hold of some to experiment for my mum, because she's screaming at me for porridge and I'm trying to keep her off it. And the old grains, which are much more sort of solid and take soaking and much longer cooking, they'll still have carbohydrates in them, but probably there's so much more roughage and fiber there that less of the carbohydrates will get absorbed. But the modern oat flakes that you buy, whether it's rolled oats or whatever, are just carbohydrates. So I really would try to avoid porridge as much as possible, particularly if you've got diabetes. It is just carbohydrates, especially if you then add to it milk and worse still, some sugar or honey or whatever. Before I forget, it's 1.7 is the upper limit of acceptable for triglycerides. So anything above 1.7 millimoles would put you into the sort of above normal bracket for triglycerides. So we want them to be down less than 1.7, and we want HDL to be well over 1, preferably over 2. But any decent doctor would explain the ratio to you. Steel cut oats are better than the kind of traditional oats, but you've got to remember that all of organic, it doesn't matter whether something's organic. If it's a carbohydrate, it's still a carbohydrate. Doesn't matter how expensive it was. If it's just a carb, it's a carb. Best breakfast, somebody's asking. Good old Greek yogurt, 10% fat Greek yogurt with lots of lovely fresh berries at this time of year. Or if you're providing you're not vegan and you eat eggs, anything with eggs. But don't forget, breakfast is just a meal. There's no rules. You can have the same kind of food you have at any other meal for breakfast. It could be leftovers from yesterday's tea, vegetables, anything you like, as long as it's low carb. But quick breakfasts for me are the homemade granolas. We've put the recipes for those on before that haven't got sugar in them. But I often just have I often don't eat breakfast because I do sort of extended overnight fast. But if I do have breakfast, it'll be berries and Greek yogurt, or if I want to, I might make myself an omelette or something like that. But no breakfast. There are no breakfast cereals in this house. They all got chipped out a long, long time ago.
Yeah.
Just pure sugar. You might as well take a bowl of sugar. And the same goes for fruit juice, by the way. Eat your fruit, don't drink it. A glass of orange juice contains the juice of umpteen oranges. You could never sit and eat that many oranges. And unfortunately, all the fibre has been broken down, and you might as well be drinking a glass of full fat Coke as have a glass of orange juice in terms of the sugar hit that you'll get. So
Yeah.
Classic breakfast foods that are sold to us as healthy are anything but.
Absolutely. And what I was going to say, even if the orange juice has got the bits in it,
yeah,
that doesn't count. That doesn't count. That's just another.
Yeah,
it's another gimmick.
It is.
Can I share my triglyceride results from? This is back from like 2015 when I changed the way I eat. So in April 2015, when I was eating like every other Asian, chapatis, rice, pasta, and everything, all the potatoes, pizza and everything, my triglycerides were 5.2. And then I changed my diet in August. And then by December 15, my triglycerides had gone down to 1.2.
Wow.
Very good.
So that's like what, in 8 months, 7 months or something. So it and my triglycerides had remained high before that for a long time, and I kept going to the GP and they'd say, oh, you need to reduce your triglycerides, eat less fat, and it was nothing to do with fat. Nothing.
Yeah.
So that's my own experience.
A lot of GPs still just don't understand that. They think it's all about fat, but basically the body is designed, when you have excess carbs, to convert them to fat and store them in the liver as triglycerides for a rainy day when we've got no food. And the problem is, in modern life, we never have that day when we have no food. And we just keep eating more and more and more and storing more and more. And when your liver's full, it goes all over the place. And unfortunately, it's really bad for us. But we are designed to be able to store that little bit of excess because we are designed to have feast and famine. We're not designed to eat 24/7, 365 days a year. And that's the problem. We are just eating far, far too much. We're overfed and undernourished because we're eating far too much of the wrong stuff and not enough of the right stuff. Somebody's asking about apples and pears. Apples are not bad. There's plenty of fibre, and again, if we go for the more tart ones, you know, they're not bad at all. Berries are by far the best. Pears, again, you know, I wouldn't be eating them every day, but they're certainly better for you than, you know, a typical carby food.
Yeah. Roshmi's asked me if I could share what vegetarian I ate to become, to bring my cholesterol, not my cholesterol, my triglycerides down. Well, I'm not vegetarian, so what I can tell you what I didn't eat, and that was I stopped eating chapatis. I stopped eating all grains, and I still don't eat grains. And this is 20, so like 6 years I changed to removing grains, and I just don't eat grains. Occasionally I might have a little bit of rice, but that's really, really occasionally. And that's usually only if I've gone somewhere and there's very little choice, or if I've gone on holiday to a different country and, you know, I'm not at home. But at home I don't make rice, I make cauliflower rice. What else? I don't eat chapatis. I've not eaten a chapati in such a long time. It took a lot to get used to that, and for me it was worth it. It was like, for me, the reason I could make the changes is because I didn't want to be disabled. I didn't want to have my leg amputated. I didn't want to be a burden on my family. I want to grow old and be as healthy as I possibly can. And if that means I can't eat samosas and I can't eat, watadawara or those things, that's okay with me. But that's my choice, and I'm not saying that's okay for everybody else. I made that choice for me, and I, like I said, I'm not vegetarian, so I do have a lot more choice. But if I was vegetarian, then I understand it would be very, very difficult. And I think what I would do is just try. I think it would be very, very difficult to cut everything out, but it would be definitely possible to reduce the amount of grains I ate. Definitely to think, okay, you know, I've got a plate of food, I'm going to make half of that plate or a quarter of that plate salad, you know, start with a salad or something. And it doesn't, you know, it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be simple. You know, you could just chop up some tomato and some onion, and if you like tomatoes and onions, or some lettuce leaves. I mean, if you go to the supermarket, it's so easy. Everything's like in pre-packed, pre-washed bags. And I know they can be more expensive, but there are choices, and there are ways of making our plate of food more healthier without giving up everything. Because I do respect it's very, very hard to give up everything. So please don't think you have to do everything perfectly all the time. Just be glad of any small change you make, and then just keep working on making those changes.
I always recommend trying with one meal at a time, you know, so go for breakfast. Can I improve my breakfast? And then when you've kind of got into good habits with breakfast, have a look at your other meals and what you can do. Most important thing is to try to avoid snacking. So make your main meals, you know, filling and tasty, not too full of carbs. But if you're using healthy fats, then you should find you need much less of the other fillers. And try and go from meal to meal and gradually adapt each meal as you go through the day. I'm just watching the questions so we don't miss anything. Somebody's asking about green smoothies. Problem with smoothies, anything that you blitz, whether it's a fruit or a vegetable, you are completely destroying the fiber in it when you blitz it. So I would say eat your vegetables, don't drink them, just as I say eat your fruit, don't drink it, because you're undoing an awful lot. Most of the benefits of vegetables, obviously they have vitamins in them, and minerals, but an awful lot of what's good about vegetables is the fiber that they give to keep our guts healthy. And you are absolutely destroying that fiber by blitzing it. You're doing in the liquidizer what your gut should be doing, and that's removing quite a lot of the nutritional benefit. Sprouted grains, well, are you talking about eating just the sprouts or the whole thing? I'm not quite sure what you mean by sprouted grains, but the sprouts would be all right, but not the actual grain bit. But I suppose, yeah, I don't quite. Do you?
You can't complete it.
Sorry?
when she's saying sprouted, you can't split the bin and the sprout that has grown on it.
Yeah.
You see, you have to eat
So-
the thing.
yeah.
I think when you sprout things, I think it's just the tops that you're eating, aren't you? The green sort of like new baby leaves. I don't know. I suppose not, because although I think sprouted. Oh, Anuj is gone, I think, but he's an
You know,
expert in
sprouted
that.
lentils,
Yeah.
lentils, those mixed ones.
I think
It's like corns grown on.
I think I think it's definitely better. And
Yeah.
It is good. It
Yeah,
is
I
good.
suppose a lot of the energy's gone into the sprout, and so you'll be getting nutrition, but without the sort of as much of the carbs, I would imagine, because the carb's been used to grow the sprout, so it probably is a lot better.
It is.
But can I add that also depends. I don't know how everyone eats in their family, but I know when I was eating everything, like if we had like waddu, everyone knows waddu, all very sprouted.
Sprouted lentils.
Yeah, it's like a whole dish of sprouted different kinds of lentils.
9 times.
But because if that's your whole meal, that's a lot of carbs, even if it's sprouted. So what I'm trying to say is you need to reduce the quantity of that, and like put some vegetables over ground vegetables in that meal somewhere. So it's like just changing your focus slightly, not saying I can't have any of that, because obviously it's enjoyable and it's nourishing, but don't have too much, because you're not having that waddu on its own. What's everyone eating the waddu with? It could be rotla.
It's possible with rotla, but I actually made it last week and I had it with salad.
Yes, so now you've made that change, but that's that's really encouraging, and it's lovely that you shared that. But normally it would be a big bowl of the waddu, which is like all the sprouted kind of lentils and things, and then we have it with like a thick. It's not a chapati like the thin chapatis. It's like a thick chapati type thing, and it's all very, very carby. And I know we'll have our special fasting and our religious days coming up where people, and we're kind of fasting, but we're not kind of fasting. Our fasting is a bit different to the fasting that we've often talked about, like when you're just going without food for long periods of time, because when we fast, we can still eat our nuts and our bananas, and it's just swapping one food for a different meal.
Yeah, but it's one meal a day.
Some people have that. Some people will have that one meal, but it depends on who on the family. Because I know my mum, when I used to fast like that, she used to say, oh, but because obviously you care for your children and you want to make sure that they're not starving. So she said, oh, you can have a banana in the morning instead of my normal toast, or so it was never really fasting for me. I'm not disrespecting anybody else's how they've done it. So I'm just saying my experience of fasting in the Gujarati way is not fasting in the intermittent fasting, the health message way. For me, it could be different for all of you.
Yeah.
Just picking up a couple of other things before we finish. Somebody's asking about buckwheat, which is still wheat, I'm afraid, still quite carby, and baked potato once a week. Well, yeah, I mean, it all depends on who you are and what you want to achieve. If you're diabetic and you're trying to keep your carbs, we recommend trying to keep your carbs below 100 grams a day. You have to factor it in. If you're trying to lose weight, then again, you need to be thinking about what else you're eating that day, and it doesn't sort of stall your weight loss. But unfortunately, white potatoes or sweet potatoes are very carby without an awful lot of benefits. So other than tasting nice. So, use, as Dacia says, just try and reduce. So if it's just once a week and you're aware that it might stall weight loss or whatever, then, we're not saying you can never have these things, but you've just got to be very aware that these are the things that are going to raise your blood sugar and cause that insulin spike and that whole process that goes on when we eat lots of carbs.
Mm.
I think that was all the things we spotted. Oh, somebody said sprouted. Do they mean sprouted mung are good as salads? Sprouted mung beans, I know they're quite
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, they are.
Again, not too much.
Yeah, I think that the overall focus should be to have overground vegetables on your plate, you know, and then, yeah, you know, I mean, I probably eat broccoli nearly every single day.
Yeah.
You
It's
know,
got huge health benefits.
yeah, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, I probably have in my fridge all the time.
Yeah.
And I probably eat them like people eat rice or pasta. It's always on my plate.
Yeah.
You know.
And it can, you know, broccoli and cauliflower can both be made into rice, but also they're lovely roasted.
Yeah.
That I often put them, I make my own coleslaw, and I just, whatever vegetables I've got, I start with a base of white cabbage, but anything I've got in my fridge, I'll grate courgettes, broccoli, red peppers, you name it. They all go through the grater into the coleslaw, and that makes a fantastic base for a salad.
Yeah.
You don't need lots of carby stuff then, because you've got a massive plate full. And I make homemade mayonnaise with good olive oil and an egg and a bit of Dijon mustard, and it's very tasty. So, you know, vegetables, I think, are underrated as to how much you can do with them and how much they can fill you up. But adding that bit of healthy fat helps to make them A, tastier, and B, more filling.
Yes. Can I just address a question that's been directed to me directly? Because I've just mentioned broccoli, and this person said they thought it wasn't good for them because they've got a thyroid issue. And yes, there is an element of that, because broccoli and certain vegetables have goitrogens, which can be a problem for the thyroid. But I was told, and that once it's cooked, so I don't eat raw broccoli. I know people can, and they make sort of like broccoli salads and various things. I don't eat it raw. I always cook it, and I cook it quite well. And I feel that removes that issue. Yeah, but you know, we're all very different, so it is trial and error. What works for me may not work for you. So always, if you're going to change anything that you change in your diet, do it slowly, and be mindful and watch how you feel having changed the things, you know. So if you bring more broccoli into your diet, do think like, you know, do I still have the same amount of energy as I did before? You know, am I noticing any different, more aches and pains, or more sort of like thyroid related symptoms? And if that's the case, then maybe that's not necessarily a good thing for you. Yeah. Do
you know what effects, what kind of effects you get when you eat broccoli with thyroid? Because I've got thyroid, and I've been taking thyroxine about 150 mm, and I don't like broccoli, but my daughter, who's also a thyroid function child, right from birth, and her kids, her babies eat broccoli every day, and she eats it as well. And she keeps saying, "Mom, it's really nice. It's really nice." And I tried it, and it's not me. But once or twice, I have mixed it with cauliflower rice. I did the broccoli with the cauliflower rice, and it just killed it over. So I couldn't taste the broccoli taste. So it was more cauliflower. So I was fine, but I would like to know what the side effects is with if you had eaten broccoli.
So Carolyn, as you have more medical background, would you like to take this?
No, I honestly, I hadn't heard about this with broccoli, so I don't know. So, but if you're on thyroxine, it means you've got an underactive thyroid.
Yeah.
So what's your understanding of what they can do, Dacha? Is it that they can?
Well, what side effects?
There's goitrogens. There's
goiter is an enlargement of the thyroid.
It's an enlargement. So it's believed that broccoli and other certain other vegetables that have goitrogens in them can stop the thyroid producing thyroxine or interfere with the process of, like, even if you're on levothyroxine, for example, to interfere with that process. But I think you probably have to eat a lot. And like I said, I probably have broccoli every day, but it's probably only about 3 or 4 pieces. I'm not like, you know, eating loads. And like I said, my broccoli isn't raw. And I've had a functional health practitioner recommend how I eat. So it's not been a problem for me. So I wouldn't worry. I wouldn't get too worried about that. I'd be more worried.
Occasional.
Yeah, I'd be more worried about the staying low carb. I'd be more worried about staying, you know, away from those nasty oils and the sugar.
Yeah.
You know, So
the problem is, if you delve into all vegetables, you'll find people who'll tell you that X, Y, and Z vegetables cause X, Y, and Z problems. And it is very much down to individuals, I think, and just say, being aware of how you feel. And if I sometimes think if people have got various issues, whether it's fatigue or aches and pains, keeping a food diary is a good idea, and just monitoring how you feel each day, and you know, if you've got certain symptoms, what did you eat the day before, and you know, if something keeps coming up the day you feel particularly a certain way, and you see a pattern with foods, you know, we're all so different. That's really what you have to do. But I certainly think from the thyroid point of view, that's another little thing I shall go off and look at more. But if you're just eating it occasionally, I really wouldn't worry. Somebody's just mentioned organic fruits and vegetables. Well, we always say buy the best quality of whatever you can. And I am all for supporting the sustainable farmers to grow, whether it's, you know, animals or fruit and vegetables in traditional ways, without the use of pesticides and all sorts of things to improve yield at the expense of quality. So, you know, buy the best that you can afford. Not everybody can afford the organic stuff, but I, you know, like to try to support the people who are trying to produce them. But it's, again, a very individual thing as to your best budget. Best way to eat cauliflower? Well, I think cauliflower rice is great. So I just blitz it very quickly in a food processor and then steam it with a bit of ghee and some seasoning. I roast it by tossing it in oil, something like avocado oil, a little bit, and plenty of salt and pepper. And sometimes I add cumin, sometimes turmeric. Give it a good toss in all of that, and then pop it in a moderate oven for about 20 minutes or so. I very rarely just boil it. I do use it as an alternative to mashed potato, so I would boil it then, but then I mash it with something tasty like a bit of cream or butter or something, and plenty of seasoning. So there's lots of ways you can cook cauliflower, but just plain boiled cauliflower is pretty boring.
Yeah, and as Gujaratis, I'm not sure everyone's Gujarati, but you know, generally Asians have lovely cauliflower recipes. And I know generally a cauliflower recipe tends to go with potatoes, aloo gobi. But you can switch that, and you can put cauliflower with peas. You know, it doesn't have to be potatoes. You know,
Cauliflower, courgettes.
Yeah, you can do so much. You know, cauliflower, maybe a little bit of carrot, not too much because that is underground. But you know, you can just be so, you know, creative.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, the wonderful World Wide Web and YouTube and things like that are fantastic now for finding lots of recipes. So I will often, if I've got a vegetable and I just think, oh, what can I do with that today? It's different. I'll just go on and search for recipes with whatever the vegetable is. And it's amazing what you can find. And once you understand a bit about, you know, healthy cooking, then you can quickly see whether the recipe's got ingredients in it that, you know, aren't what we want. But most vegetable recipes hopefully will err on the side of being low carb. You know, it's amazing. The old-fashioned boiled vegetables have just out the window. They're boring. Can do so much more with them. And we should be making them a big part of the plate.
Yeah. And you know, as Gujaratis or Asians, South Asians, we've got so many vegetables that even, you know, we can access here in the UK.
Yeah.
You know, we've got tindora and binda and I mean, you know, valor, and there's just so many amazing vegetables that don't have to be put with potatoes. That's just something that we're conditioned to do. You know, ringan batatanu shak, binda batatanu shak. It's just like everywhere is potato, and just leave the potatoes out. Just don't have them. You know, yeah, that's making me hungry now.
Yeah.
Talking about cholesterol, also what I noticed that how much does this affect if it's if your body is naturally building up cholesterol? How much can you fight with it? Well,
I don't quite understand what you mean, because the body needs cholesterol.
Yeah,
every system needs it.
Built. I am genetic. My cholesterol is genetically very high built.
Yeah.
So how much can I fight with it? Saying, okay, I'm eating reasonably. I cut out majority of the carbs to fight it low, to make it low.
Yeah.
But still, my cholesterol is very high. You know,
and I think,
can't fight anymore.
I think you just need to not stress about it. You know, the most important thing you can do is lead a healthy lifestyle. So that is the healthy diet, the exercise, and I know you do yoga and various things, and try not to be obsessed about it. As I say, high cholesterol is associated with greater longevity than low cholesterol is. So please, you know, I think you're doing everything you can, and you shouldn't stress about it.
Thank you very much. I think that is all the questions you've answered today. I very much appreciate it for all the participants to take part in this. And thank you very much, Caroline and Daksha, for joining in. And I think Rekha did join in later on. I was going to apologize on behalf of her for not being attending today. Shall we meet up again on the 24th of August?
Just double check. I forgot to do that before.
What date was that? Sorry.
The 24th. Yeah, that's okay. Well, that's 3 weeks from now.
Yeah.
Is that okay? That's fine for me. And I mean, I could do a bit about stress if you like.
That would be nice. That would be really nice.
And again, for everybody that's still online, if there's anything specific that you would like, you know, please use the WhatsApp group to say, could you do a bit on whatever aspect of diet or lifestyle that you want us to talk about.
Unfortunately, I can't do the 24th.
Okay.
But
can you make it on the 17th then?
I can do the 17th, yes.
Yeah, 17th.
Yeah, should we do the 17th then?
Okay.
Is that all right for you, Panna?
Yeah, it's fine. It's just that we start our fasting from 9th next week. So it is going to be 1 meal a day. So let's see how that works for our diet. As it is, I don't have any breakfast in the mornings, and I do tend to have 1 meal a day, even now. But sometimes you go crazy and crave for things which you don't want to eat. You do eat. So that's what I've been doing. And I thought, okay, from the 9th, I'm going to be very strict and not eat any crap for a whole month.
Good. Oh, well, we can have a little checkup on you then on the 17th.
Yeah. Definitely. It's just that I was put on steroids, and like you mentioned, it lingers on. It makes you hungry.
They do. Unfortunately, they drive your appetite. So you are, you know, having to battle those as well as everything else.
Yeah,
So I'm not
that's
surprised you were a bit there earlier
Yeah.
on. Is it a course for so long? Have you nearly finished, or?
I finished that, but it's
Yeah.
still lingering
Oh,
on.
yes, it takes a
keep
while.
feeling
Yeah.
hungry. Yeah. I
Yeah.
keep feeling hungry every
Yeah.
time. I
Yeah.
thought, no, this is no good. After I have eaten, I regret it because it really makes me feel
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
plumped up and, you know,
Yeah.
thinking, why did I eat this? Yeah, was it necessary? I have to question myself now, thinking, is it necessary to eat? Was I hungry? Like Daksha had mentioned, ask yourself, like
Yeah.
I've been asking myself. But yeah, next week, the next session will be about stress.
Yeah.
So we are looking forward to that next. And we shall meet up on the 17th. Thank you very much again for meeting up today and for a lovely session on cholesterol. I have learned quite a lot. I'm sure everyone else has learned too. And thank you for all the questions that was in the chat.
Indeed.
And that has been answered by Daksha and Caroline. So we shall meet again on the 17th. I look forward to more questions. And if you, like Caroline said, would like to know something else, just mention it in our chat group and we'll bring the topics up on that. Thank you very much again.
Okay, thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you. Thanks for your
Thank you,
participation.
everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye. See you in a
Thank
few
you for
weeks.
host- Thank you for hosting. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. Good night. Stay safe.
Yes,
Thank
bye-bye.
you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Next topic, whenever you decide on the metabolic, how to increase your metabolism.
Caroline.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's not an easy thing to discuss, but I'll have a think about that. Okay.
All right. Thank you
All right,
so much.
thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.